recording is to demonstrate the purchase order capability of recharge and what the system entails when it comes to creating purchase orders and the impact of the recharge processes. I will be pointing out only straightforward process. I won't be going into any detailed processes for the purchase orders, and people familiar with D365 will recognize that. Those that don't, obviously you would need to approach a partner for a full demonstration of the procurement process. This demo is purely intended to show the touch points of recharge during the creation of the purchase orders. I think what must be noted is that there are certain defaults available or in place for this configuration. The configuration recharge is currently running on is that the recharge cost centers, which is an attribute for reporting of recharge, is tied to a particular department on the legal entity using the normal financial dimension for department. Based on that, if the system picks up that there's a unique recharge allocation applicable to the transaction, the system will allocate that immediately to the transaction with zero input from the user. If there are multiple choices of options available, the system will throw an error and the user would have to manually select the recharge allocation. We're going to just create a normal purchase order. I'm selecting one of my service vendors. In this case, this vendor is defaulted to department 26, if I recall correctly. We're going to raise a expense transaction. Now, this can occur through normal items, can occur through normal procurement categories. That is immaterial. We simply just use the procurement category as a simpler means of demonstrating this process. In this case, we are going to give a service charge. I need to select my site and warehouse. Those come through by default, and we can enter a value. Now, when I enter a value and I save the record or create a new line, what the system is doing at that point is picking up any additional defaults that the procurement category has or the transaction requires that can be populated by the system. Now, as we can see at the bottom here, the financial dimensions have been populated. I have not populated these. These are possible to default by standard functionality in the system. If I stand on the General tab, on the far right-hand side here, we have the recharge attributes that are populated against this transaction. Now, what you can see over here is a default source that's populated that is based on the legal entity and is used to drive the mappings for recharge. Our cost center is mapped to the financial dimension for the department. Now, in this example, I've used the same values to try and simulate, but obviously from a business perspective, you can have different mappings between the different combinations. The allocation has automatically populated. If this was not the case, I can open up the allocation. I can select the type of allocation that I would like to look at. And in this case, I'm just going to open up headcount, and I can choose between different allocations that are available to me as the user. Benefit for the users, if you can configure your system to unique allocation groups, is that the user will not have to worry about what needs to be allocated to your allocation groups. And these groups are defined to be simply split out allocations across multiple legal entities. Okay, so if you just hover over the allocation, the system will show you the percentage that has been allocated to the different allocation codes, which are the subcomponents between or on the allocation group that's been assigned to this transaction. You can see here 15% to allocation code 3, 25 to 461, and so on. In our system over here, 3, 461, 523, and 903 actually represent legal entities that we're allocating to. They can also represent customers or third parties, which would technically reallocate down to one of the legal entities and then bill a third party customer as an ongoing transaction. Once we've completed our transaction, we can add a line. This time I'm going to add in a telecommunication charge. Let's just do cellular. Similar sort of capture process, and as I mentioned before, this is a simple purchase order process. What's likely to happen here is you're going to have many more values that are required. What we can see here is because this vendor is defaulting to department 26, we get the same allocation on this. Now let's say this actually wasn't for department 26 and our user had to change the department. We're changing this to the IT department. Just save the line so it can recalculate the information, and you'll see that the recharge cost center is updated and the allocation associated to that recharge cost center has also updated. We hover over this, we get a different allocation. So we can see that in this case, it's 20, 25, 30, and 25. That is the allocation for this group of companies. Now, once we've got all of our information in the system, we can then go through with our normal process and go through receipts. In fact, we will first have to confirm this purchase order. Most clients will obviously opt for a workflow approval of a purchase order. In my case, I've disabled workflow. We would have to confirm it. That would trigger a send to the actual vendor for the purchase order itself. No impact from a recharge perspective. And then we go through the normal receiving and invoicing process once delivery of goods or services has been rendered to your company. In this case, I've actually set this company up as a two-way matching process, so we don't have to go through the receipt process. But if you had configured for three-way matching, you would do a receipt followed on by an invoice. I'm going to jump straight to the invoice now, and I can generate an invoice. Once again, simple process. Just capturing information regarding the invoice, such as the invoice number, a description, and an invoice date. You can see the information has come through from the purchase order relating to the lines of the purchase order. And if I scroll down further, we can see the recharge information on the right-hand side here. If I scroll to the second record, you'll see it updates as well. This is standard functionality with a very limited touch by the recharge module. Once we've got our information successfully saved on the actual invoice, we now have the ability to submit through to workflow. Once again, I've switched off for the sake of this demonstration, and we're going to go straight to the post routine. Okay, once the invoice is posted, we can now review that information on the recharge ledger. If we go over here, go to our recharge module, separate module housing all of our setups and configurations, and we can look at the recharge ledger. Now, the recharge ledger is a housing of transactions that have been generated that are yet to be recharged onto legal entities. These recharge ledgers allow for transactions of the similar nature to your general ledger entry table, for example. So that's a separate table. It's posted to during the invoice processing, and recharge ledger is updated during the process of the procurement cycle. So on purchase order, the minute the allocation is assigned to the transaction, the recharge ledger entry is created in a draft state while it is not in a posted transaction state. So the status over here on the right-hand side would be draft while it is in purchase order. But once the invoice is posted, the entry is updated to a confirmed state, which simply means that it is confirmed and ready to be recharged onto your different legal entities. At this point, the system is updated with regard to the transaction in our current company, but we have not yet updated the transactions in the target companies. That is a separate recharge process where we will then create a recharge proposal, and we would do invoices, sales, and vendor side to simulate the actual transactions, the intercompany transactions, that is, between the different legal entities in the actual recharge proposal. That will be demonstrated in a separate video, but for now, all I wanted to show you was the ability to generate the recharge selection process during the procurement cycle, as well as the entries that are generated as a result of this. And if you look at the entries, you can see familiarity of some of the values here. These are entries that are posted on today's date, being the 16th of January, and you can see the values that have been allocated. We also have markups, which is a configuration on recharge, which is actually an additional charge that gets added to the recharge entry table for a transaction. And in this case, I think it was a 5% charge that was applied to one of these transactions, most likely this one over here. That is by configuration, where you would like to actually make a profit, or you want to recoup some of the taxes that are applicable to that entry that you lose during the actual transactions, and so on. The recharge ledger entry also shows you information with regard to who that is being sold to, the route that that transaction will take, and the routes themselves doesn't have to be a single legal entity to a target entity. It can actually route through multiple legal entities where your from and your to will be the first and the last entry of this route. That is based on intermediary companies, and it simply passes the cost through companies in between the source and target legal entity. Stand on the cost tab over here, it shows us cost information, fully multiple currency capable, and it applies the transactions at the correct exchange rates during the actual process. You can also look at more information with regard to the recharge ledger entry itself. This shows you very detailed information with regard to the entry, as well as additional information regarding to the purchase and the original source transaction. We have the capability of jumping to the original document for any sort of inquiry you need to make on a particular entry. That just helps you to identify any unknowns or any strange entries that are showing on your recharge ledger. Okay, before we go into the recharge proposals, I'm going to wrap up this demonstration and we will see you on the next one. Thank you very much.